Hey guys, welcome back. We are going to talk all about Battle of the Bastards. Episode 9 of Game of Thrones Season 6. Episode 9, typically the one where S goes down. And it went down. Full spoilers, so if you haven't seen the Battle of the Bastards, we're going to talk about some bastards battling. Hell of a battle, right?
That episode blew my mind. I sent Matt Fowler an email after he watched it, or after I was sure that he watched it, and I was like, can we give it a 12? Like, I fully believe that is the best episode that Game of Thrones has ever done. On, like, sheer production value alone, I think Miguel Sapochnik, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, like, can we just clone him and have him do every episode ever? He's the same guy who did Hard Home. He's doing the finale next week. It blew my mind. I thought that they pulled off something truly, truly impressive in this episode. And as someone who has loved fantasy my entire life, read fantasy novels, and read about these epic battles, you know, there were like a couple just scenes that this episode brought to mind where I had read these things on paper and I was like, I will never see this happen. In between Dany riding her dragons and destroying Meereen, and that just like insane battle from Jon's perspective. I was like, this is the closest that and best that is ever done to like actually bringing this fantasy spectacle to life, and it just made me really happy.
It was an amazing episode to behold. You have
more issues with it than
feel
I
like
do.
a killjoy by saying it wasn't like, I don't think it was their best episode. I don't think it was like one of their greatest episodes, even though I thought it was a great episode. So I just keep wanting to couch on that. It was a great episode, and it was so just impressive, right?
Was it still a 10 for you?
No.
Okay.
But like it wasn't a 6 either. Like it was like it was in the 9s, like maybe a lower 9. But it was a great episode, and it was just as far as what they pulled off on TV. Was really impressive. I mean, people joked a lot back in the first couple seasons that they would always have the big battles happen off camera,
Right.
and a lot of that was strictly budget, right? They can't do it. They still can't do it all the time, right? But now they're nearing the end. It's a huge hit. Obviously, HBO has probably increased the budget, and once in a while they can go big. And this time, I mean, they went so big. And everything you mentioned, and we're going to talk more about Meereen later, but it's like just some of the swooping shots with her on the dragon. But then yes, the main huge battle that happened with Jon, and just feeling like you were right there in the thick of it.
Yeah,
and the insanity of it.
The couple, single take scenes where we follow behind him. That scene, I read the interview with Miguel that Entertainment Weekly ran, which apparently that whole sequence where Jon got submerged and was trying to fight his way up to air was all off script. Was something that they didn't have the time to do what they needed to do, so they had to come up with something else. And I thought that was so visceral. Like, you never really think Jon is going to die.
Yeah.
But still,
and if he does, he'll get better.
Right. Like, it was just such a great depiction of, a battle, and really putting you into it and making you feel those things. And the one thing I always felt like whenever I would read these fantasy novels is like Axis in the Wayfarer Redemption or Aragorn or someone like that. Like, why are they always the ones who win, who survive? They bring down all these people. And I feel like seeing this scene with Jon, a lot of it is luck, but also it's just like he's a great fighter, and we've earned that. And I just thought like a lot of these fight sequences were really earned.
It was like sort of perfectly chaotic, right? Because there were moments where, as a viewer, I was losing track of who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, but I think that's totally appropriate, right? Because if you're in there, you're going to lose track. The fact that, showing how horrible Ramsay is, again, the fact that he was just willing to fire arrows on everyone, and so it just, put you right there. There were parts where like Jon, like someone would grab someone and they'd be shot by an arrow, and I didn't even have time to process whether that person was like, he was grabbing him as an ally to help or as an enemy to fight, but it didn't matter.
I don't think he did either at a certain point.
I think that is the point. Like, even if you're Jon, I mean, he's our obviously main connection in there. There are other people we care about. But yeah, that's going to be what it's like for you too at a certain point. You are just surrounded by chaos and people, and it doesn't matter if it's your friend or foe, you could still be trampled to death, and I think the fact that they put you in there is a real testament and triumph of, just artistically of what they pulled off there.
And I really think, this episode could change the game for how fantasy is depicted. I haven't seen Warcraft yet, but I know there were some complaints with that movie. That's obviously another big, fantasy spectacle. But I think this episode was so well done that it's really up there with like Lord of the Rings for me in terms of how well executed the battle is and the special effects. I mean, even from the season 5 finale where, Dany riding Drogon looked like something out out of a Quidditch match to like what we saw in this episode just blew me away. And obviously they're going to have to top it when they get to the end of the series.
Right.
And I don't know how they're going to do it. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, because even putting aside the fantasy element, which is much more prevalent in Marine, where there's dragons involved. Yeah, I mean, this was just battle. Like we were saying, they used to do it off camera most of the time, but now it's like, okay, no, we can, in special occasions, we can go all in and we can just put you in the thick of things in a way that, only sort of giant epic movies tend to do. And like, yeah, I like what you said about, I think that all those elements will come together at the end because we're all expecting some sort of giant battle against the White Walkers.
Yeah. And
that's where what we saw here will really be put to the test with the fantasy element and more fantastical things. I mean, I guess one won the giant. He was part of that fight.
R.I.P.
But yeah, I think it is very exciting and they keep raising the bar, and this was kind of the ultimate.
Yeah.
So what did you think? Are you as impressed as we are? I think you are. I think
how
can you not? Even if you like hated the episode for whatever writing reason, you used to be like, come on, that was amazing.
It looked amazing.
It looked amazing as far as just the spectacle of it. Let us know in the comments. And now that they've raised the bar, what do you think for like going towards the series finale and what we assume is 2 years? Can they top this? All right, so let us talk, though, about Sansa, who this was a big episode for. Some big moments for her, starting with her being present for the sort of conversation with Ramsay at the top of the episode. She had a great line about, "You'll be dead tomorrow."
It was funny. I tweeted then every Sansa Stark moment is a mic drop moment, and did not realize at that point after that just how many moments she would have like that throughout the episode. You weren't crazy about the writing for her. This episode.
I shouldn't say not her dialogue. It's the main thing that I don't think the writing quite adds up is her decision to not tell Jon, "Hey, I might have a giant army from Littlefinger coming." It ultimately feels like a convenience to make it a surprise. Like, I don't think it's justified in the writing, especially when they have that big, like, you're foolish to do this. And she's making a lot of good points at that point, and he's being sort of very Ned Stark in the, like, noble, naive way he's going to approach this. And everything she's saying, but we don't have enough men. Why wouldn't she at that point say, look, I sent a letter to Littlefinger? It just seemed like you could kind of come up with your justifications for it, but I don't think it really adds up except to make it a cool moment where she shows up at the end.
Well, first I should say when the Knights of the Vale, like, I mean, I didn't think that Jon Snow was going to lose at any point throughout this episode. I was like watching this alone in my living room, and the Army of the Vale showed up with Sansa just like looking like a total boss, and I just started crying. Like, there are so few moments where something good happens in a great way, and like that was just such a triumphant moment that I don't know, it just like, it really moved me, and I was like, I'm a fucking sap. Like, pardon my bleep, but like that's how I was like, this is, you're being too sentimental. Game of Thrones does not make me cry. But that being said, I fully agree with you as that being a lapse in logic, and I think that it's not, I don't know, I really think that next episode is going to deal with it. I think Jon Snow has that same exact question, and I hope that he and Sansa are going to confront one another over that. Because, like, obviously she didn't tell him she sent a letter.
Right.
She didn't tell him that she had this army. Thousands of people died. You know, Jon and Sansa have been on the same side simply because they had the same enemy.
Right.
But what comes next? Like, are they necessarily going to stay on the same side just because they're family? Because I think those are characters who have very different goals, ultimately. And he's going to want to look to the north, and I'm not sure where she's going to want to look, but I don't think that it's necessarily there. So I agree with you that it doesn't make any sense, but I also think that Jon is going to take her to task for that. And I'm really interested to hear what her logic is, because she clearly does not fully trust him, and she does not trust him as a commander, and he did exactly what she thought that he was going to do when she told him not to. We were talking a little bit about it was sort of his Ned Stark moment.
Right. I mean, you know, it was an interesting episode because, look, we've talked a lot about how this season is so unusual for Game of Thrones because it's giving us what we want traditionally in a way Game of Thrones never has. And there's a lot of just straight up triumph and things kind of going on a straighter line than we're used to. And that's a strange thing for a show 6 years in that has kind of built itself up on we're going to swerve when you don't expect us to. So now maybe that's a little bit of my hesitation of saying this is one of the best episodes ever, is because it played out in such a straightforward way. Like, you could pretty much in your mind come up with like how this was going to chart, but that's not a bad thing in and of itself. Like, and so I try to sort of check myself on that, right? And be like, sometimes it's great to see the heroes win. And I usually love that. It's just Game of Thrones has kind of set itself in a different place. Maybe that's why with the Sansa thing, I wish it was just more straightforward too at that point. If it's going to be Jon's going to fight back from insurmountable odds, he will win. Why not just have Sansa be like, hey, I'm going to go talk to Littlefinger. He might have a giant army, and have a reason that Jon has to start that fight now, that, you know, so he could still have it in his mind. Maybe they're coming. And I think it still would have sold as far as, again, logically, we didn't think Jon was going to die, yet it still was like, oh my God, they're being crushed. This is horrible. So I almost felt like they didn't need to have that hold back. But I want to say, yeah, Sansa's stuff in and of itself was great. Her being so strong at the front, telling Ramsay that. And then, yeah, at the end, the fact that Jon stopped himself from killing Ramsay and understood how important this was to Sansa. And then getting, the fact that they were back in Winterfell, which was very touching. That to me was the most touching moment.
The banner unfurling.
That was what got me. Like, oh my gosh, they've got it back. They've got Winterfell
People
back.
keep talking about how, like, in next week's episode, there's going to be a Stark sigil above Winterfell in the opening credits instead of Bolton.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
And, like, that is such a victory. I mean, we've agreed on a lot of things about, like, elements of this season feeling too predictable, feeling like we figured it out.
By their standards, I think, especially.
Right.
Yeah.
This episode didn't feel like that for me, simply because, like, I didn't think Jon was going to die. I think that's bad storytelling to bring him back just to die again.
Yeah.
Like, Melisandre and him were sort of talking about that too.
That'd be kind of messed up,
yeah,
right?
that would be weird if Lord of Light did that. That being said, you know, I didn't figure out this episode beat for beat. There were a lot of moments in the battle that did surprise me. You know, even though we thought she wrote a letter to Littlefinger or Sweet Robin, like whichever one it was, we all assumed that the Army of the Vale was going to show up. Even then, like, I just think a lot of it came down to directing, and this episode was so well directed that I was honestly on the edge of my seat. And, like, you know, I like to tweet through the episodes, but I couldn't look away. So in that sense, I think that's why I was so impressed by it. But there was one other thing afterwards when I was reading criticisms of Sansa's story in this episode that I do sort of buy, and it's a little one, but it's also important, which is Sansa left the parlay with Ramsay before he made the comment about his dogs, and yet that was sort of her big moment, which I'm like, yeah, that someone messed up in the editing room. Like,
yeah, I mean, you could say, like, Jon mentioned to her couch, did you know that he hasn't fed his dogs?
What a jerk, right? Like, we treat our direwolves way better than that jerk.
Right. So there, I saw people mention that too, which it is one of those, yeah, it's a little too bad because it's such an important moment that, you know, she wasn't there when he said it. You can kind of come up with your explanation behind the scenes. It's just, it's more the Littlefinger thing, but again, you were absolutely right. It's like almost like I don't think this is their best written episode, but there are great moments and has a achievement of, like, filmmaking on TV. It's so great that it's still great TV. It's a great episode of TV. And Sansa, certainly her being able to take out Ramsay there at the end is very satisfying, and it's good to get satisfying things. I mean, again, I shouldn't be like, I only want Game of Thrones to punch me in the gut, even though we have learned to expect that. It was very satisfying to have Sansa, you know, show, especially she's back, you know, people had said this, it's like she's back in Winterfell, back in her home where she was such a naive, hateable in many ways little girl when we met her when the show began, and now life has hardened her, this horrible man has hardened her, and this is what she is now, like, after everything that's happened. She's a very different person.
I think it's really interesting, too, with her as a character, because I had this thought with Sansa that I realized I've had about a lot of other characters on the show, which is, has she gone too far? Has she gone too far into darkness? Like, her using Ramsay's own tactics to kill him, you know, suggests, and him even saying, you know, there's a part of me still in you, like I have changed you. Some people are like, has he molded her in his image, which is a scary thought. But I realized it sort of reminded me of the line that Melisandre said earlier in the episode, and Davos and Tormund, where they're like, we thought we picked out who were our leaders, like who are our kings, who are going to save us. But we just need to take the people we get. And I think that's a really interesting lesson with Game of Thrones, is like, these might not have been the heroes that we thought we would get, but they're the ones that we have. And the way that it teeters them on darkness, I think is really interesting and a credit to the show.
Yeah, and of course, they're all being changed by these experiences. They're all kind of crossing lines they once would not have. And I don't think we're supposed to necessarily, like, we cheer the justice of Ramsay getting killed. You can't help but it. But I don't know if you're supposed to be like, yay, Sansa is a much darker, nastier character. But it's sort of, it makes sense. Like, it tracks her story, and they're all going to come out of it different and darker, except for Rickon, who didn't get to speak. But I'm going to assume he kept his nobility till the end. So what did you think, though, of Sansa's storyline in this episode specifically? Did it all pay off for you? And what do you think about her keeping the secret of the fact that she might have a giant army coming to help? Should she have maybe share that information? And did it track story-wise that she didn't? So let us know in the comments. Let us move over, though, to Dany. We've kind of been talking about it a bit because there was another thing about this episode where, again, it's like, so much great stuff happened that it adds up to a great episode, but there were just a few things that were a little off to me. And I will almost say that I almost felt like the Marine stuff in this episode literally felt like they arced out the season and they go, oh crap, we don't really have a place to put this naturally. So what if like the first 12 minutes or so are in Marine and then there's like one other scene? Because a lot of us, myself included, assumed this episode was going to be all Battle of the Bastards. And then it was kind of weird when it began in Marine. I'm like, the whole episode's going to be back and forth. And then it wasn't, except for that one scene. So I did think that was kind of funny. Like they almost couldn't figure out where to put it. But it was great stuff. Like it was so cool. Like talking about, again, getting satisfying moments. Dany freaking riding that dragon around, just kicking ass.
Yeah. All of it. It looked so good. Yeah, that didn't bother me, and I actually liked the, for all that we were like, we knew what we were getting in this episode. I don't think anyone expected Battle of the Bastards to open with 12 minutes in Marine.
Yeah.
And also for her to I love that they've just like sniffed out the Myronese knot that took George R. R. Martin forever to get around when writing The Dance with Dragons, and they're like, nope, here it is. Like we had the siege at Marine, we had this epic battle. We were complaining last week that there wasn't that much. Well, it turns out it was all in this episode, and it looked amazing. And I thought this episode was surprisingly trimmed of a lot of fat. I thought that pretty much every single scene had meaning, even down to the quiet. Like Davos is like, I'm going on a walk. Oh, hey, he finds the proof that Shireen was sacrificed by Melisandre, which I've been waiting a season for. The Marine stuff didn't throw me off. I thought it fit really well, and also for an episode as big and epic, and that they must have reserved so much of their budget for this season to do this episode. I thought it all worked really well, and I think there are interesting parallels between Dany's victory in Marine and her being primed for her next step, with Jon and Sansa's success in the North and them being primed for whatever their next step is. Like, these big conflicts they had are out of the way. Are they that much closer to finally clashing or becoming allies?
It certainly seems so. I mean, again, Dany has never been more powerful than in this episode in every way. Like, obviously, physically, the fact that she was, like, riding her dragons into battle in a way we've never seen before. And then, she completely won. And then, again, it was strange. It was awkward the way we began the scene, but it was a great scene, which is Theon and Yara speaking to her, only because, again, the joke that this season everyone's flying around, and that it was a little strange that we didn't get any establishment that they'd reached Marine. And so it was like, whoa, they were already talking to her. Like every pretense of like, these people say they're Ironborn, these people say it's just like, nope, they like got her straight,
This one, I don't know, maybe like the E3 plague that I'm recovering from, like, got rid of all my cynicism. But I was like, you know what? I don't want to see those scenes.
Right.
I don't care. I would rather have them right in the throne roroom. I'd rather have Yara flirting with Dany, which I didn't know I needed until it happened.
That was awesome. I mean, it was great moments.
I was like, yes, all of it. I was fine with it, and we spent so long dealing with all these things that you and I have snarked so hard on the Westeros Express, like everyone zipping around, teleporting. This one, I was like, you know what, I don't need the setup for this.
I was easy to forgive for me because it was a great scene, and again, spoke to Dany's very literal position of power, right? It's like they come to her hat in hand and are just like, we need your help, and she is, throwing down decrees. She's basically like, hey, you got to stop all that pirating and raping and pillaging. And Yara's kind of got to be like, I guess we do, because we need your help, Which
is a major turning point for the Ironborn, especially since Yara's whole pitch to the Ironborn was like, I'm going to bring us back to greatness and have us do all the things we love. And she's like, well, I guess we don't need to do all those things that we love.
Yeah. And it wasn't in any way subtle, because Dany literally articulated it, but I actually really liked when she basically kind of put the scene into thematic context about a sort of sins of the father thing.
Yeah.
It's like all four of us,
Happy Father's
including
Day.
Tyrion, had really horrible fathers, and it's kind of up to us to do better and to fix things. And I don't think the show is saying that, oh, and they're going to do everything perfectly and everything will be great. But, you know, we were talking about they're all going to change and grow, and some of them will get darker, but some will become better people. And Theon had to kind of go through all of that, you know, to be where he is. But I liked Dany articulating that and just, you know, that being like, okay, yeah, we have to fix, we are the next generation and things are going to change, you know. And yeah, I definitely think Dany at this point is primed. I'm very curious, we're going to talk more about the finale soon, but I'm curious, yeah, it's like how directly, you know, her going into Westeros is something we've been waiting for since this show began. And I don't know if it's going to happen in the finale, but I think it's happening really soon, you know, next year.
Also, I loved the not so subtle comment from Tyrion about, hey, remember when your dad put all that wildfire beneath King's Landing? And we're all like, yeah,
why
we were on
is
top
he
of that.
mentioning that?
We were on top of that last week, Tyrion.
Right,
but in case you missed it.
It's like they want to mention the wildfires being an important element that could possibly come back into play. But yeah, so I thought that was really great. And, you know, we've talked about, again, will Dany be a villain or whatnot, but and that remains to be seen, but she certainly is now, like, seeing the Dothraki, you know, fight for her, seeing Theon and Yara pledge themselves to her. It's everything's coming up Dany.
Yeah.
You know? And that's really exciting, I think, because there was some times where she was sort of stuck in, especially even the beginning of the season, in a stagnant place. And now I'm excited to see what's going to happen with her dragons. So what do you think about where Dany's story is? And, you know, are you excited to see her gaining all this power right now and all these allies? I was really thrilled just to see Theon and Yara in the scene with her, you know? It's great. It's awesome. So let us know in the comments. All right, let's continue on that thread, though, a little bit, because, you know, other people have talked, hell, EW did a cover story on it when the show was coming back this season, but this season is really, really about, like, the female characters rising to power, and it's kind of happening left and right and all, and some of it's, like, direct as far as, like, literally, I am now, you know, in charge, and some of it's just something like Sansa, who will remain to be seen what happens with, now they have Winterfell back, but she's certainly pulling strings and sort of taking control in a way we've never seen before.
I love that. I remember seeing those headlines with EW and their covers, and I was like, okay, yeah. But this season really has proved to be the season of the ladies.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you look back and you look at season 2, and it was the War of the Five Kings, and it destroyed Westeros, and those kings are dead. And now it really is the women who have come into power. I mean, Cersei in her own way. You have Arya, who's decided to be Arya Stark again, like true figures of power with Sansa, with Yara, with Dany. It's really incredible. Even like Lady Olenna. We'll see what's up Marjorie's sleeve, but these women are so powerful, and it's just so exciting to see the series really just, I don't know, give them a platform and show their strength.
I think it just kind of continues on what we were talking about the idea that we're seeing, like the idea that things have to change in Westeros, and that's sort of you know, a literal way to do it is that, you know, yeah, these people in power who have almost all been men in power have all sort of screwed things up and had a lot of sort of ultimately pointless battles because either, you know, no one won or one army wiped out the other army, but then those guys got wiped out by someone else later. And it's time for a big sort of bold change, and a kind of literal way to do that is maybe letting all these people who have not been allowed simply just were not, like, oh, there's never been a queen, you know, they were saying in this episode.
I love that scene. Yeah. Has there ever been a queen of the Ironborn?
Right.
Has there ever been a queen of Westeros?
Right. And it's like, no, but things didn't go so hot in the old people, and a lot of people were very unhappy, and so it's time for a change. And yeah, I don't feel in any way like, oh, this is so, like, overdone or whatever. I just think it's kind of thrilling because it's, you know, some of it's not only the female characters that are sort of rising up, and there's people like Jon Snow, who was, like, pushed aside as a bastard, and even Theon, and who was so hateable for a long time, and we're seeing them transform too. But I think, yeah, the female characters are just a great tangible way to show that the old ways didn't work or are just outdated.
Even Brienne.
Yeah, even Brienne, who everyone scoffed at as, like, a female knight, and now we're seeing that. And, you know, the show got a lot of heat, and I think rightfully at a certain point, for it's like, it's one thing to say, oh, it exists in a harsh time, and yes, characters would just be raped and there would be no justice for it. And I think everyone understood that, but I still think that the problem was that when it was going to that well too many times, and we didn't see the after effects for characters we knew and cared about, it just seemed to like be glossed over, the abuse they were taking. And so this season might have gone pretty dramatically heavy on making up for that. We've talked about that there's been some times where they're kind of like talking to the audience a little bit. But I think it works. You know, it's just exciting.
Power to the ladies.
Power to the ladies for Westeros. All right, so lastly, let's just talk about the finale, because next week is the season finale. And there's a lot in play, of course. What are your sort of biggest expectations for the season finale?
I think Dany departs for Westeros for show at the end of this season. That could even be the last shot for me. I think we're going to see her fleet departing. You know, the synopsis for this episode did tell us Euron will pop back up, so maybe we'll see whatever his big plan is, but I definitely think this is the season where Dany at least heads to Westeros. How about for you?
Yeah, so I'm curious about that. There's still kind of the weird Euron, like he was mentioned in this episode, but we actually see him again when we come into play. So part of me wonders if she'll actually like leave or just be primed to leave. My main thing is I feel like one way or the other, and probably with Wildfire, it's time to end King's Landing maybe in a way that we've never seen. And you know, we talked about how King's Landing wasn't really as exciting as it used to be this season, and now we're excited by the idea of Cersei burning that mother to the ground. You know? And I think maybe the Sparrow story kind of needs to come to an end. I think it's time for that to wrap up, and the Wildfire is the most, the biggest way that we're seeing, and I think it's going to be the way. But I think we're going to see closure in King's Landing in a tangible way.
And
Wildfire.
adding on to that, I definitely think gold will be his shroud for Tom and Baratheon the week. I don't see him making it out of this season alive. But on the other side of the world, we better finally get R + L = J. Like, I really think we're gonna find out what was in the tower with Bran.
Right, but Bran, it looks like he's back in the finale. So yeah, will he and thus we get wrap up on that flashback? I think it is time. I think a lot of people, and I think it would make sort of a lot of sense with what this season has been about as far as Jon Snow's return and sort of his even rising more in prominence.
Because what comes next for him?
Right. If we get that. We also didn't even mention how this episode had, we mentioned in passing, you did mention, but it's like the fact that Davos now, has the sort of the smoking gun or the smoking little animal.
Stag.
He's going to confront Melisandre. I don't see them both making it out of that alive.
Ooh.
I do wonder if we'll see sort of. Although I thought either Davos or Tormund were going to get killed in this episode, and they both survived. So who knows?
I was very happy that they both survived.
I was too. But especially because of the Bran Tormund. But I am. Yes, I do. I wonder how the Davos Melisandre sort of confrontation will go. But I do think maybe one of them's going to be taken out by the end of it.
Do you think Dorne will show up again?
No, I mean, I don't think it can be completely ignored to the end of the series. But I feel like, it was a little awkward and funny how the premiere was like, let's get rid of this.
Yeah, trim the fat.
With some big deaths. So I don't think they're going to revisit it. I am curious, and what do you think? Do you think we're going to see Arya again in the finale, or that her proclaiming her name, that's enough for her end of her season story arc, and we can just see her again next year?
I think that could be the end for her. I also think it could be the end for the Hound, Bran, Jaime even.
Yeah.
Like, we don't necessarily need to check in with those characters again. I think they got a good final beat, and there are these other characters that have bigger moments that I want to see paid off.
Yeah, Jaime is. I agree with you on most of those. I don't think we might not see Arya again this season, because that's a good way to end her season, even though it took way too long to get there. She's reclaimed her name. That can be it for this year. I do wonder about Jaime, especially. I think maybe because I was so disappointed in sort of the whole Blackfish River Run arc. I kind of would like to see him again, and who knows if that's him showing up to watch King's Landing burn to the ground or not. But
my last big prediction is a big group that we have ignored for the past few episodes. I think the White Walkers come back as a big reminder that there's another threat out there, and I think that also could be the way that we end this season is just them at the wall.
I think there's a very good chance of that, and I think with Bran coming back too, they've got to kind of tie into the White Walkers of it all and remind you, here's our big bad. We got Randall Ramsay, but we got other things to deal with.
Yeah.
So those are our thoughts of the season finale next week. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen? Who do you think is going to die? And what characters will appear or won't appear? Let us know in the comments. We've got plenty more coverage leading up to the finale, plenty of coverage after the finale for all things Game of Thrones. Keep it here at IGN.